Have you ever witnessed a moment where prejudice turns into triumph? Pilots ignore black woman, but when the plane crashes, she takes control and surprises the world. The emergency alarm on Flight 837 pierced the cabin air like a desperate scream. Red lights flashed frantically on the instrument panel as the Boeing 757 plummeted in freefall at an altitude of 10,000 meters. In the cockpit, Captain Richards was unconscious, blood pouring from a cut on his forehead, and co-pilot Bradley struggled alone with the unresponsive controls. Mayday, Mayday. This is Pacific Airlines Flight 837. We have lost complete control of the aircraft. Bradley shouted into the radio, his voice trembling with sheer panic. Meanwhile, in the passenger cabin, 342 people were living their last moments of terror. Oxygen masks swung violently, luggage flew through the aisles, and desperate screams echoed throughout the aircraft. But there was someone there who wasn't screaming. 34-year-old Diana Foster remained calm in seat 16A, watching every movement of the falling aircraft with the technical precision of someone who had spent 15 years flying military fighter jets. Her eyes automatically analyzed the angles of descent, the wind speed, and the behavior of the control surfaces. She wasn't just watching the disaster unfold. She was calculating solutions. Could this be the moment that changes everything? Stick with Black Voices to find out. Just 2 hours earlier, Diana had tried to introduce herself to the flight crew at the airport. As a certified commercial pilot and former Air Force officer, it was standard protocol to identify herself when flying as a passenger. But Captain Richards had barely glanced at her. "Oh, sure, another flight attendant who thinks she's a pilot," he had muttered to Bradley loud enough for Diana to hear. "These diversity quotas are getting out of hand. Let her sit back there and pretend she knows anything about flying." Bradley had laughed. "Next thing you know, they'll want women flying aircraft carriers, too." Diana hadn't responded. She had just smiled politely and headed for her seat, storing the humiliation as fuel for something greater. What those men didn't know was that she had been the first black woman to fly the F-22 Raptor fighter jet in combat missions. With over 3,000 hours of flight time and a specialization in impossible emergency landings. Now, as the plane plummeted and the same men who had despised her screamed for help in the cockpit, Diana unbuckled her seatbelt with a calmness that frightened the passengers around her. Her movements were precise, calculated, as if she already knew exactly what was going to happen. The flight attendant rushed down the aisle, trying to calm the panicked passengers. Diana gently took her by the arm. "I need to get to the cockpit now." "Ma'am, all passengers must remain seated during the emergency," shouted the flight attendant, her voice competing with the deafening noise of the alarms. Diana looked directly into the desperate woman's eyes. "I'm a certified pilot, former Air Force. If you want to have any chance of surviving, get me there." For a moment that lasted an eternity, the flight attendant hesitated. Then something in Diana's calm, determined gaze convinced her. She nodded and began to make her way through the chaotic aisle. As she walked toward the cockpit where the same men who had humiliated her now fought desperately against death, Diana couldn't help but smile. Riley, if you're enjoying this story of overcoming adversity and justice, don't forget to subscribe to Black Voices to find out how a simple humiliation would turn into the moment that would change the lives of everyone on board forever. As Diana walked down the aisle toward the cockpit, the passenger screams of terror mingled with a deafening sound of alarms. But her mind was focused on something far beyond the chaos around her. She was reliving every second of that humiliation from 2 hours ago. At the boarding gate, Captain Richards had been even cruder than she had initially realized. When Diana approached politely to identify herself as a certified pilot, he hadn't even looked at her pilot's license. "Look at this, Bradley," he had said, turning to the co-pilot with a mocking smile. "Another one of those diversity pilots who showed up after they changed the rules. I bet she flew a Cessna 152 twice, and now she thinks she's Top Gun." Bradley had laughed too loudly. "Man, remember that woman last month? She said she was experienced and almost crashed the plane taxiing to the runway. These quotas are becoming a joke." "Exactly," Richards continued, now speaking directly to Diana as if she were a child. "Honey, I know you want to feel important, but this is serious business. Let the men do the work, okay?" What hurt the most wasn't the words, but the laughter. Other pilots passing by the gate began to pay attention to the comedy. One of them had even taken a discreet photo, probably to share in the WhatsApp group with a joke about another woman who thinks she's a pilot. Diana had swallowed the humiliation in silence, but inside a flame was igniting. They had no idea who they were belittling. Diana Foster wasn't just any pilot. She was the only black woman to have commanded rescue missions in hostile territory in Afghanistan. She had landed damaged fighter jets on makeshift runways under enemy fire. She had more flight hours in extreme situations than Richards and Bradley combined, but the worst was yet to come. As she walked away, Richards had shouted loud enough for half the airport to hear, "Hey, princess, when you grow up and want to fly for real, come find me. Maybe I'll let you clean my cockpit." The laughter that followed echoed through the terminal like a public slap in the face. Passengers turned to look. Children asked their parents what was going on. Diana felt every pitying glance, every whisper of "poor girl." Now 2 hours later, as she opened the cockpit door where the same men who had humiliated her were fighting desperately for their lives, Diana couldn't help but notice the cruel irony of fate. Bradley was alone at the controls, sweat pouring down his face, his hand shaking violently on the controls. Richards lay unconscious, blood streaming from a deep cut on his forehead where he had hit it during the first violent turbulence. "I can't do it. I can't do it," Bradley shouted into the radio. "We've lost everything. Hydraulics, electrical, navigation. We're in freefall." When Diana entered the cockpit, Bradley looked at her in utter despair, not recognizing her immediately. "Are you a pilot? Please tell me you know what you're doing." For a brief moment, Diana considered reminding him exactly who she was. She considered mentioning the comments about diversity quotas in Princess. She considered letting the weight of the irony crush him completely. But 342 lives were in her hands. "Get out of the chair," she said with a calmness that contrasted brutally with his panic. "Now." Bradley hesitated for a second, his eyes finally recognizing the face of the woman he had humiliated at the airport. The shock was visible. The same princess they had told to grow up was now literally the only thing between them and certain death. "You," he stammered. "The diversity pilot who's going to save your life," Diana finished, taking the controls with precise, confident movements. Every new humiliation she had suffered in the last few hours only fueled something inside her that those arrogant men couldn't see. A determination forged in the fire of 1,000 battles they would never have the courage to face. What they didn't know was that every word of contempt had only prepared the ground for the moment when they would discover who was really in charge. Diana took control of the Boeing with the precision of a surgeon. Her fingers slid across the instruments with a familiarity that left Bradley speechless. Every movement was calculated, confident, as if she had been born in that cockpit. Stabilizing altitude at 8,000 meters, she murmured, adjusting the flaps manually. "Main hydraulic system is dead, but the secondary is still responding. Bradley, I need you to monitor the fuel pressure while I work the flight controls." Bradley obeyed automatically, his hands still shaking. The contrast was brutal. 2 hours ago, he had been mocking her as a quota pilot. Now, he depended on her for his survival. But what really haunted Diana wasn't just Richards and Bradley's insults. It was the reaction of everyone else at the airport who had witnessed the humiliation. When Richard shouted, "Hey, princess, maybe I'll let you clean my cockpit," other Pacific Airlines pilots at the gate burst out laughing. One of them had even discreetly filmed it on his cell phone, probably to share with the company's real pilots group. "Man, that was good," laughed Captain Morrison, a 20-year veteran of the company. "These women think flying is like driving an Uber." The worst part was when Flight Supervisor Rebecca Walsh, one of the few women in a position of authority, walked past the group and said absolutely nothing. She just lowered her eyes and quickened her pace as if she hadn't seen or heard anything. The sisterhood Diana had hoped to find simply didn't exist when prejudice came from above. "Let her try," Richards had said, loud enough for Diana to hear. "When she crashes on her first serious turbulence, she'll remember that a woman's place is serving coffee, not flying planes." What none of them knew was that Diana Foster had flown rescue missions in hostile territory for 5 years straight. She had landed damaged F-22s on